The wagon stopped at the end of Cutter's Wharf at 3:30 in the morning, and Blythe Sawn, midwife and surgeon's daughter, heard it from her upper window because she had not been sleeping. She had not been sleeping because the Marsh girl 3 houses down was 9 days past her time, and Blythe had learned long ago that the last days before a difficult birth made the same sound as the hours before a storm, a particular quiet that pressed against the ears. She heard the wagon. She heard 2 sets of boots on the wet dock planks. She heard a third sound that was not boots, a dragging, an irregular weight pulled along wood, and then a splash that was not large enough for a body going into the water, but was large enough for a body being dropped against a mooring post. She put down the lancet she had been cleaning. The wharf outside her father's surgery was not a place that received visitors at 3:30. The surgeons and the tooth-pullers and the midwives of Whitby Yard worked daylight hours. After dark, the wharf belonged to the tide and the fish carts and the occasional drunk who mistook Cutters for the road to the public house on the corner of Blackgate Lane. She went to the window. Below, on the dock, 2 men in dark coats were climbing back onto a wagon without a lamp. The wagon moved before the second man's boot left the running board. It went north along the wharf road without slowing, and the sound of the wheels on wet stone faded into the fog off the harbour before she had finished counting 20. She stood at the window for another count of 20. Then she put on her second shawl and her working boots, and took the lantern from the hook beside the surgery door. The man was against the far mooring post, half sitting, his back against the salt-crusted wood, and his legs in 6 inches of standing water. He was breathing. She knew that before she reached him because she could hear the pull of it, slow and dragged, the particular rhythm of a man whose body was working hard to keep him present when something in his blood was doing its best to close him off. She held the lantern close. His coat was a gentleman's coat, dark wool, cut by someone who had charged by the hour for the cutting. His stock had been removed, his right hand was bare, his left hand still had a glove on it, and under the glove's cuff she could see the edge of a ring she did not look at yet. She had been trained by her father, Dr. Arthur Sawn, for 11 years. She knew what a man looked like who had been drugged. She knew the difference between gin and laudanum, and the things that were sometimes added to both when someone wanted a man to go to sleep and not be certain of waking. This man had taken something. His pupils, when she lifted his lid with one thumb, were the size of pinheads. His pulse was at 42, and it was not rising. She fetched the porter's belt from inside the surgery door. She looped it under his arms. She walked backwards over the dock planks, dragging him by slow feet, his heels leaving 2 dark lines through the puddle on the landing. The surgery door opened inward, and she got him through it on the 3rd pull, and she shut it behind them with her foot and turned the bolt. The surgery floor was flagged stone and cold. She got him up onto the low examination table with the pulley block her father had installed for patients too ill to lift themselves, and she noted, as she worked, that his boots were made by someone with a workshop on a respectable street. The stitching on the left sole was a maker's mark she had seen on men who did not eat their dinner in rooms like this one. She stripped the wet coat. She checked his pockets. His purse was gone, and his cards, and whatever he had been carrying in the breast pocket. There was a lighter place in the lining, where something had been removed recently enough that the silk was still pressed flat. The ring was still on his left hand because the glove had hidden it, and whoever had gone through his coat had worked quickly and by the fingers. She left the ring where it was. She covered him with the surgery blanket and set the kettle on the spirit lamp and sat down in her father's chair to wait. Her father was in Edinburgh for another 3 weeks. Her father had left her the surgery, as he always did when the Edinburgh Society called him north, and she ran it as he ran it, which was to say without ceremony and without waste. She had been running it for 3 years since her husband Tam died of the fever he had taken at the dockyard. She had been running it since before that, in the ways that a woman runs a thing without it being recorded that she runs it. She watched the man breathe. His fever came at 5 in the morning, the way she expected it to, because the drug he had taken was not a clean drug, and whatever had been added to it was burning off now in heat and sweat and the occasional word that surfaced from wherever he had gone. He said a name once, low and without inflection, and she did not catch it the first time. The second time he said it, She was close enough to hear. He said, "Emmett." She wrung the cloth out at the basin and laid it across his forehead, and did not say anything back, because there was nothing to say back that was not the wrong thing, and she had learned that in 11 years of sitting beside people who were not entirely present, the fever broke at 8 in the morning, and by noon he was awake. He opened his eyes. They were a dark, clear brown, and they looked at the ceiling of her father's surgery with the expression of a man who was doing a very careful accounting of where he was and how he had come to be there. He said, "Where am I?" His voice was dry and measured, and the kind of voice that had been educated at some expense. She set down the probe she was cleaning and crossed to the table. She said, "A surgery on Cutter's Wharf, Whitby Yard. You were left against the mooring post outside at 3:30 this morning. It is now 20 past noon. You have been ill with a drug in your blood, and I have been here the whole time." He looked at her. He said, "I am indebted to you." She said, "You are. What is your name?" He was quiet for a moment. He said, "My name is Dalton." She pulled the stool to the table and sat level with him. She said, "Your ring says otherwise." She had looked at the ring, finally, when she was certain he would not notice. It was a signet ring, and the crest on it was one she knew from the newspaper columns, because her father subscribed to the broadsheet and left it on the surgery desk. And she read it while she cleaned instruments. He looked at the ring on his left hand as though seeing it at some remove. He said, after a moment, "James Dalton Ashcroft. I go by Dalton. The second part I would prefer not to be said aloud in this room until I know who is likely to hear it." She said, "There is no one to hear it but myself and my cat, and the cat cannot be trusted with anything." He looked at her for a moment, and something shifted in the set of his mouth that was not quite a smile but was in the same neighbourhood. He said, "Then I am the Viscount Ashcroft. My brother was the Earl of Cairn. He died last winter. The title passed to me in April, and I came home from the north in June, and on the night of the 14th of August I went to a card-house on Mercer Street at the invitation of an acquaintance, and I woke up against a mooring post." She said, "What was in the cup?" He said, "Laudanum. Something underneath it I did not recognise." She said, "Belladonna, I should think, based on your pupils when I found you." "My father would say phosphorus, but my father is in Edinburgh, and I am here, and I know Belladonna's work when I see it." He looked at her with the particular attention of a man recalibrating his estimate of the room he was in. He said, "You are the surgeon," she said. "I am the surgeon's daughter. I have done the surgeon's work for 11 years. Whether that makes me the surgeon depends on who is asking and what they mean to do with the answer." He considered that. He said, "What is your name?" She said, "Blythe Sawn. My husband was Tam Sawn, who was a ship's carpenter at the Whitby Yard. He died 2 years ago. I have run this surgery since the spring before that, and I have delivered 312 children in this district, and I know the smell of most things that are put in cups without consent, because this is a wharf and I have been on it a long time." He looked at her. He said, "Then I owe you more than I can account for," she said. "You can account for it by staying on that table until your pulse is above 55 and your feet can carry you without the wall. After that, we will see." He stayed on the table. He was a contained man, not given to unnecessary speech, which she noted and approved of, because men who talked when they were recovering complicated the recovery. He ate the broth she brought him. He slept in the afternoon and woke at dusk with clearer eyes. On the second morning, he was sitting up against the surgery wall with his knees drawn up and the old wool blanket around his shoulders, and he looked less like a man who had been pulled off a dock and more like a man thinking through a problem he had not yet named aloud. She was at the window, mixing a poultice for the Marsh girl's swollen ankles, when he said, "My brother did not die of a fall." She set down the mixing bowl. She turned. He said, "The verdict was a fall from the stair gallery at Cairn House. He was found at the bottom at 4 in the morning by the hall boy. The coroner said the gallery rail had given way. I examined the rail myself in the week after the funeral. The rail had not given way. The rail had been cut, not all the way through, enough to hold a man's weight in daylight, not enough to hold it if he leaned hard and fast in the dark." She sat down in the chair opposite him. She said, "Did you tell the coroner?" He said, "I told him." He wrote it in his notes and closed the case. The verdict stood. "I went north because there was nothing left to do in the south, and I did not know what to do with what I knew." She said, What brought you back?" He was quiet for a moment. He said, "My brother's solicitor sent for me. There is a matter of the estate, and there is a letter." He stopped. He said, "There was a letter. It was in my breast pocket on the night of the 14th. It is not there now." She looked at the coat folded on the chair by the window. She crossed to it and checked the breast pocket, though she had checked it the first night and found it empty. She said, "Who sent the letter?" He said, "My brother's steward, a man named Pruitt. He wrote that he had found something in the account books that he could not bring to anyone but me, and that I was not to speak of it to the solicitor or to Lady Khan until he had shown it to me himself." She said, "And the woman who invited you to Mercer Street?" "The acquaintance," he said, "a Mrs. Vella Renshaw. She was known to my brother. She was known to Pruitt as well. I understand that now. I did not understand it on the night of the 14th. She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Do you know where Pruitt is now?" He said, "He was dismissed from the Khan estate in July. I was told he had taken a position in Manchester. I do not know if that is true." She turned back to the window. She looked out at the morning wharf, the fish carts moving, the water flat and grey, the last of the fog burning off the far edge of the harbour. She had seen it 1,000 mornings. It looked the same as it always did. It had looked the same on the morning after Tam died, and on the morning after her father left for Edinburgh, and it looked the same now, with a Viscount in her father's surgery and a story that had the shape of a thing she knew. She had been born in this district. She had delivered children to women in rope walks and chandleries and counting houses. She knew the people who kept the wharf and the people who worked it, and the people who had learned, over years, to make the two groups answer for each other. She knew who saw things. She knew who wrote them down. She said, "I want you to stay on that table for another day, and I want to ask you something." He waited. She said, "Pruitt was dismissed in July. Between July and August, before you came back from the north, who knew you were returning?" He said, "The solicitor, Lady Khan. Pruitt knew because he wrote to me first, and Mrs. Renshaw because I wrote to her myself to arrange the Mercer Street meeting, because her note had asked me to confirm the date." She said, "She asked you to confirm it in writing." He looked at her. He said, "Yes." She said, "Then she has your handwriting and she knows your business, and she had 3 weeks to arrange the rest of it." She picked up the mixing bowl again and finished the poultice. She said, "I have a question and a proposal, and you are not required to say yes to the proposal." He said, "Ask." She said, "First, is there anyone who knows you are alive?" He said, "No one. I was not expected at any address until the end of the week." She said, "Second, I know a woman at the rope walk on the north side of the yard. She takes in lodgers and she does not ask questions beyond what day you intend to leave. I can put you there tonight under a working man's name with enough bread and coal for a week, and no one will look for a Viscount in a rope walk lodging. That is the proposal." He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "And in exchange?" She said, "Nothing. I am a midwife and a surgeon's daughter, and you are against my mooring post. That is enough." He looked at her a while longer. He said, "No, tell me what you are thinking." She set the bowl on the shelf. She said, "I am thinking about Pruitt. I am thinking about what he found in the account books, and I am thinking that whatever he found, someone wanted it in their hand before it reached yours. And I am thinking that a dismissed steward in a Manchester position, if that is even true, is a man who is either running from something or being held where he cannot speak." She paused. She said, "My husband worked the yard for 6 years. The men he worked with are still here. Some of them know Manchester. Some of them know the railroads north. If Pruitt is real, and if Pruitt is findable, I can find him faster than a solicitor can, because I know who to ask." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Why?" She thought about that honestly, the way she thought about difficult things, straight on without turning. She said, "Because your brother's gallery rail was cut, and no one answered for it. And because you have been gone 4 months and come back to a drugged cup and a mooring post, and that means whoever arranged it believes they can do it again. And I have a surgery on this wharf and a father coming back in 3 weeks, and I would prefer that nothing on this dock becomes a habit." He said, "That is a practical answer." She said, "I am a practical woman." He went to the rope walk lodging that night. She walked him there herself, at the back of the yard, along the dark lane behind the net sheds, and she introduced him to Mrs. Ida Croom as her cousin's husband, recovering from a chest complaint, needing quiet and the sea air, and Mrs. Croom asked no questions beyond the day of departure, as Blythe had said she would not. She came back to the surgery and stood at her father's desk and looked at the harbour for a while. Then she sat down and wrote a letter. She wrote it to a man named Barwick, who had been Tam's foreman at the dockyard and who had moved north to Sunderland the previous year and who knew every rail yard and rope walk and mill town between here and York. She asked him if a man named Pruitt, late of Carn House in the south, had come through any of those towns in July or August, with a ledger or a box of papers he was anxious to keep close. She sent the letter with the morning's fish cart, which went to Sunderland on Tuesdays and Fridays, and arrived faster than the post. 3 days later, the first word came back. It came in the form of a young woman who sold cockles at the yard gate, and who was Barwick's wife's niece, and who arrived at the surgery door on a Thursday morning, and handed Blythe a folded note and a dried mackerel, and said nothing at all before she went away. The note was from Barwick. It said that a man answering Pruitt's description, middle-aged, thin, a country manner, carrying a leather satchel he would not put down, had passed through Sunderland the first week of July and taken lodgings above a chandler's shop for 2 weeks before moving on. Barwick's wife had spoken with the chandler's wife. The man had been receiving letters from a London address. He had been there, Barwick wrote, and then he was not. Blythe went to the rope walk that evening with broth and the note. She sat on the stool in the corner of Mrs. Croom's back room and waited while he read it. He read it twice and folded it and held it in his hand. He said, "He is running," she said. "He is waiting, there is a difference. A running man does not take 2 weeks in a chandler's loft," he said. "He is waiting for me to find him." She said, "He sent the letter, he wanted you to come. Someone intercepted you before you arrived, and now he does not know whether you are dead or searching, and he is in a town between here and York waiting to find out." He said, "Can you find out which town?" She said, "Give me another week." She went back to the surgery. She sat at her father's desk. She thought about who else she knew between Sunderland and York, and she thought about the women in particular, because the women who worked the rope walks and the chandleries and the fish markets knew the towns between the towns that did not appear in letters. She wrote to 3 of them. She wrote to Mrs. Dallow in Stockton, who had been a patient of her father's for 20 years. She wrote to a woman named Peg Hutch, who kept a lodging house in Hartlepool and had delivered broadsides for her father's practice when Blythe was a child. She wrote to the Quaker meeting in Darlington, because the meeting kept records of itinerant visitors and was unlikely to turn away a frightened man who had the South on him. She also went, on the Friday, to the counting house at the north end of the Wharf, where a man named Cruzy kept the harbour records, and she asked him who had brought the wagon to the south end of the dock on the night of the 14th of August. Cruzy looked at his book. He said the wagon had come in on the tide road from the east at 2:20, and it had left by the same road 40 minutes later, and the name entered in the night log. For the east road was Renshaw and Doyle, chandlers, which was a firm he did not know, but which had paid the harbour toll in coin. She wrote the name in her pocketbook. She said thank you to Cruzy and went back to the surgery. That night she told the Viscount about the harbour log. He said, "Renshaw." He said it the way a man says a name when it has confirmed something he already knew. She said, "You knew it was her." He said, "I suspected it from the moment I woke on your table. Mrs. Vella Renshaw has been managing my brother's affairs since before the fall. She was, I believed, at the time, a family friend. She and my brother corresponded. She was named in his private papers as a person of confidence. I was told this by the solicitor when I came south. I went to Mercer Street because her note said that she had something of my brother's. She wanted to return to me personally." He stopped. He said, "She played it very cleanly." Blythe said, "She is doing it again then." Renshaw and Doyle. He said, "What does that mean?" She said, "It means there is a partner. Doyle is a name as well as a firm, and it means she is not finished. If she wanted you dead, you are not dead. If she wanted the letter from Pruitt, she has it. What she does not have is whatever Pruitt knows beyond the letter." He looked at her. He said, "You think like a physician." She said, "I think like a woman who has been diagnosing things no one else in the room wanted to look at for 11 years. There was a silence. he said. "After it, my brother's name was Emmett. He was 4 years older than I am. He was not a complicated man. He was honest and he was careful, and he was the only person in our family who knew the difference between what a thing cost and what it was worth. He was going to be married in the autumn. He died in the winter, and the woman he was going to marry went into a house in the country and has not come out of it, and I have not known what to do with any of it until this week." He said it without performance, the way a man states a fact he has been carrying alone for a long time. Blythe looked at the floor of the lodging room. She thought about Tam. She thought about the way she had gone back to the surgery the day after the funeral and opened her father's instrument cabinet and counted everything in it, not because it needed counting, but because she needed her hands on something real. She said, "I lost someone too. I know how it goes, the counting and the not sleeping. I know what it costs to keep the surgery open when you would rather close the shutters." He looked at her quietly. She said, "I told you that because I want you to know I am not asking out of curiosity. I am asking because I think you have been carrying Emmett's name alone in every room you have slept in. And a name carried alone does a particular kind of damage. And I am here, and I can hear it." He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you, Miss Sorn," she said, Blythe. "If we are going to find Pruitt together, use my name." He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "Blythe." The second word came from the Quaker meeting in Darlington. It came on a Wednesday, in a letter that smelled of tallow, and was written in the plain hand of someone who took care with words. The meeting wrote that a man of Pruitt's description, they named him by his manner and his anxiety, not by his name, had attended the Thursday meeting twice in August, and had asked the clerk privately whether there was a way to send a sealed parcel to London without it going through the regular post. The clerk had directed him to a shipping agent on the Market Street. The meeting did not know what had become of him after that. They included, at the bottom of the letter, the shipping agent's name. Blythe folded the letter and went directly to the rope walk. She sat across from the Viscount in Mrs. Croom's back room and laid the letter on the table between them. He read it. He picked up the letter and read it again and set it back down. He said he sent something. She said he sent something by private parcel, not the post, which means he knew the post was not safe. He said then, where did the parcel go? She said, that depends on where he addressed it, and that depends on who he trusted by August. He said, he trusted me. He wrote to me. She said, yes, but when you did not come, or came and went wrong, he may have had a second name. She paused. She said, who else knew your brother? Who else would Pruitt have trusted with something he could not trust to the post? The Viscount was quiet. He said, there is a woman. She was my brother's secretary. It was unusual, but my brother did not care for convention. Her name is Miss Dray. She lives in the town of Cairn, near the estate. She was let go when Lady Cairn took over the household correspondence after Emmett died, but she and Pruitt were of long acquaintance. Blythe said, can you write to her? He said, not in my own hand. If my hand is being watched, she said, I will write it. Dictate what you need to say. He did. She wrote it at Miss Croom's kitchen table in her own plain hand, with no sender's address, asking Miss Dray whether she had received any parcel or package from a Mr. Pruitt lately, and whether she would be willing to hold it until a trustworthy party came to collect it. She addressed it to Miss Dray, care of the Cairn post office, and handed it to Mrs. Croom's grandson to take to the posting box at the corner of Blackgate Lane. She went back to the surgery. She sat at her father's desk. She thought about Emmett Ashcroft and the cut gallery rail, and a woman named Vella Renshaw, who had arranged a wagon and a drugged cup and had not bothered to look back. She was still thinking about it on the Friday when the third word came. This time it was not a letter. It was a boy of about 12 with a shaved head and the posture of someone who had learned to make himself small in a crowd, and he came to the surgery door in the mid-morning and asked for Mrs. Sorn by name, and when she came, he handed her a folded sheet that had been sealed with a smear of kitchen wax and said that a man had paid him 6pence to bring it to Whitby Yard. The man had not given a name. The boy described him, middle-aged, thin, a satchel under one arm that he held close. He had been standing at the corner of the Darlington Market Street. The letter said, I have the book. I cannot bring it south myself. Tell him they cut the rail for the Doyle note. I have the Doyle note. I have had it since March. "Tell him to come with someone who knows what it means." She read it twice. She went to the rope walk. She laid it on the table. The Viscount read it once and set it down flat and looked at it without blinking for a long count. She said the Doyle note. He said, "Renshaw and Doyle, there is a note, a financial instrument. My brother's estate was not as it should have been when I came home." The solicitor said there had been a loan taken against the Khan property, signed by my brother, that I could not account for. I asked where the note was. I was told it had been mislaid. He stopped. He said, "It was not mislaid." She said, "No." He said, "Pruitt found the note, and he found the book, the account book, and he saw what the note had been used for, and he ran." She said, "And your brother found it first, before Pruitt. And someone cut the gallery rail in December." He put his hand flat on the table. He said, "She borrowed against Emmett's estate. She forged his signature, or she had someone forge it, and the note is the proof, and Emmett found out." She said, and Emmett told someone, or wrote to someone, and by Christmas he was dead. The silence lasted a long time. Outside, the harbour sounds came through the window, the cry of a gull, the knock of a boat against a piling, the distant voice of someone calling across the water. He said, "I am going to Darlington." She said, "Yes." She said it before she had decided to say it. She said, "I am going with you." He looked at her. She said, "Pruitt said, come with someone who knows what it means." A forged financial note is a medical instrument in the wrong hands. It can be read or it can be missed, and it cannot be missed. My father taught me to read accounts the same way he taught me to read a chart. Because a body and a set of books both lie in the same direction, and both tell the truth if you look at the right thing. She paused. She said, "And I am a midwife from the Wharf. I am no one that Mrs. Renshaw will look at," he said. "You would leave the surgery," she said. "The Marsh girl delivered this morning. I have no one due until the 15th. My father is in Edinburgh. The surgery has a bolt." She looked at him straight. She said, "I am coming." He let out a breath. He said, "All right." They went on the Tuesday coach, sitting apart, she with her midwife's bag on her knee and a spare apron in the outer pocket to account for her presence if anyone asked. He in a plain coat and a working man's hat that Mrs. Croom's husband had left behind the door years ago. She had cut his hair the night before with her surgical scissors, and he had sat on the stool in the surgery without complaint while she worked. And when she was finished and he looked in the glass, he had said, "That is not a gentleman's haircut." She had said, "No, that's the point." They found Pruitt in a room above a cooper's yard on the south edge of Darlington Market, a room that smelled of sawdust and vinegar, and the particular anxiety of a man who had been waiting alone in a small space for a very long time. He was thinner than his description had promised, and the satchel was on his lap, and when the Viscount walked through the door, Pruitt stood up and gripped the satchel's buckle and did not let go. He said, "I did not know if you were alive." The Viscount said, "I am alive. Tell me about the note." Pruitt told them. He sat on the edge of his bed, and they sat on the two chairs, and he talked for 40 minutes, and Blythe listened to all of it, and asked 3 questions, and wrote nothing down because she did not need to. The note was real. The forgery was real. She could see it in the account book, in the column where the loan had been applied, and where the subsequent payments had been drawn, in a hand that was almost the late Earl's, and was not quite, in the way that a healthy pulse was almost arrhythmic under a certain combination of drugs, and was not quite. She said, "The 3rd payment. It's dated February." Pruitt looked at her. He said, "Yes." She said, "The Earl died in December." Pruitt said, "Yes." She said, "Someone continued making the payments after he died. Someone who had access to the estate accounts, and who knew the note was there and did not want it found." The Viscount said, "Very quietly, Lady Khan." Pruitt said nothing. She said, "Not Mrs. Renshaw." The Viscount said, "Both. Lady Khan is my brother's widow. She had the estate accounts. Mrs. Renshaw arranged the instrument. Lady Khan managed the payments. My brother found the note because he trusted his own books, and Pruitt found it because Lady Khan became careless in July and left the wrong box on the wrong desk." She looked at Pruitt. She said, "Is there anything else in the satchel?" There was. There was a letter in a clear, educated hand, dated the 5th of November, from Lady Khan to a firm in the city, asking for the renewal of the note under a revised name. It had been composed in draft and then put away, presumably to be recopied. It had never been sent, because Emmett Ashcroft had died on the 21st of December, and the draft was no longer necessary. It was enough. They came back to Whitby Yard on the Thursday evening, with the satchel between them in the coach, and she had her hand on the latch of the door, and he had his hand near hers, not touching, and neither of them said anything for the last 20 miles, because there was nothing to say that was not too much for the inside of a coach. She brought the satchel to the surgery. She cleared her father's desk and laid everything on it, the account book, the note, the draft letter, and she organised it in the order it would be read by someone who had not heard Pruitt's 40 minutes. He stood in the surgery and watched her work. He said, "You set it out like a diagnosis," she said. "It is a diagnosis. The patient is your brother's estate, and the injury is the forgery, and the cause is Mrs. Renshaw and Lady Khan, and this is the chain of evidence that demonstrates it." She set the draft letter at the end. She said, "This is the piece that does the most work. A letter in Lady Khan's hand to a city firm renewing the forged note. That is not a thing you can account for any other way." He looked at it. He said, "Will a magistrate receive it?" She said, "A magistrate will receive Pruitt and the book and the note and this letter, and he will receive Mrs. Croom's night log entry for the wagon, and he will receive the Harbour record from Cruzy. What he does with it is his business, but the chain is whole." He looked at the desk for a long time. Then he said, "Blythe." She turned. He said, "I have been asking too much of you," she said. "You have not asked anything of me." "I have offered everything," he said. "That is what I mean." He looked at the surgery around them, at the instruments on the rack and the flagged floor, and the smell of carbolic that came off the walls at any hour. He said, "You have a life here that is not this, and I have taken 2 weeks of it." She said, "You have given me the most interesting 2 weeks I have had since my father went to Edinburgh." She meant it plainly and said it plainly. She said, "Tam died and the work went on, and the work was enough. It is still enough. But a mooring post and a satchel and a forged note and a cooper's yard in Darlington, that is also something." He said, after a moment, "I am going to London to give this to the solicitor, and then to a magistrate. I am going tomorrow." She nodded. He said, "I want to come back." She looked at him steadily. She said, "You are a Viscount, and I am a surgeon's daughter on a wharf. You will get to London, and the rooms will have rugs, and the stairs will have carpet, and you will remember what your life weighs." He said, "I know what my life weighs. I have known it since December." He stopped. He said, "I am not coming back to the surgery. I am coming back to you. If you will tell me whether that is something you want." She thought about that the way she thought about everything, directly, without flinching, all the way through. She thought about Tam, who had been a good man and a kind one, and who had loved her as steadily as a man can love a woman he does not quite understand. She thought about the years after him, which had been quiet and full and sufficient, and which had felt, until 2 weeks ago, like the whole of what remained. She said, "I want you to go to London and give the solicitor the satchel, and I want you to take Pruitt with you, because he is not safe in Darlington, and he will not be safe anywhere until Lady Khan is before a magistrate. And I want you to write to me when the hearing is set, because I will be a witness if they will have me." He said, "They will have you," she said, "and if you come back after all of that, then come back. Come back knowing that I have a surgery and a father and 112 women in this district who will need me in the night, and that I will not leave the wharf. If you come back knowing that, come back," he said. "I know that," she said. "Then go." She said it with something in her chest that she did not name, because she had learned a long time ago that naming things too early was as dangerous as cutting too deep. She said, "Go. I will be here." He went in the morning. He took Pruitt and the satchel and the coach north to the rail line, and she stood at the surgery window and watched the yard come to life the way it always did, the fish carts and the rope-walk girls, and the sass and the water against the piling. And she went in and opened her father's instrument cabinet and counted everything in it, not because it needed counting. The hearing was set for the 19th of September. She received the letter on the 12th, written in his hand, plain and brief. It said the solicitor had received the papers. It said the magistrate had accepted the chain. It said Pruitt had given his deposition with a steadiness no one had expected and had been received into the protection of the court. It said Lady Khan and Mrs. Renshaw had been called to the hearing and that Mrs. Renshaw's partner, one Mr. Aldous Doyle, had offered a full statement to the court in exchange for consideration, and that the statement had closed the last gap in the chain. He wrote that Emmett's name had been said aloud in the magistrate's chambers on the 1st of September, in the context of a murder charge, and that it was the first time he had heard it said by anyone other than himself in nearly a year, and that he had found it harder and also less hard than he had expected. He wrote, at the bottom of the page, "The hearing on the 19th. I have asked the magistrate whether a witness from Whitby Yard who identified Belladonna in the pulse of the drugged man would be heard. He said yes. She went to London on the 17th. She went alone, with her midwife's bag and the spare apron, and her father's reading spectacles in the front pocket. She had not told her father where she was going, because her father was still in Edinburgh, and because she would tell him everything when he returned, and he would listen the way he always listened, with his hands on the desk and his eyes on her face, and he would say, at the end, that she had done the right thing, and she would say yes, and they would drink tea, and that would be the whole of it. She arrived on the 18th. He met her at the coach stop, in his own coat and his own boots, with his hair grown back enough to look like himself. He said, "I am glad you came," she said. "Of course I came." They did not touch. They walked to the address he had arranged, a respectable house in a quiet street, run by a woman he did not explain, and she was given a room with a fire and a window over a garden, and she slept. The hearing was in the morning. She sat in the courtroom and looked at the magistrate's bench and at Lady Khan in a charcoal silk that was expensive enough to have been planned, and at Mrs. Renshaw beside her in grey, and at Pruitt on the witness bench, with his hands folded and the satchel on the table in front of the clerk. She was called. She gave her name, her training, her years of practice. She described the mooring post and the pulse and the pupils, and the smell of the drug, and she named Belladonna by its effect and its chemistry, and the particular way it collapses the nervous system without fully ending it. And the magistrate listened, and the clerk wrote, and she spoke clearly and without hesitation. The chain was read, the account book, the note, the draft letter, Pruitt, Doyle, the Harbour log, Mrs. Croom's night record. Lady Khan's solicitor stood and said that the primary witness was a tradesman's daughter from a northern wharf whose testimony could not be tested against the customary standards of a court of this standing. He said it with the polished confidence of a man who had used the same sentence in many rooms. The magistrate looked at her. She stood before he asked her to. She said, "I delivered 314 children in the Whitby Yard district. I have run a surgery for 11 years. The man you are asking about was lying against a mooring post with a pulse of 42 and pupils that indicated a specific alkaloid compound. I identified the compound. I kept him alive. I wrote 3 letters and walked to Darlington and read an account book, and the chain in front of you is whole because I did those things. You may apply whatever standard you like to the fact of my address." She sat down. Lady Khan's solicitor did not speak again. The magistrate committed both women for trial. The case was sent to the assizes. Pruitt was released from the court's protection and received back into the employ of the Khan estate on the new Viscount's instruction. Doyle received his consideration and was gone from London before the week was out. She went back to Whitby Yard on the Friday. She took the morning coach north and arrived at the surgery in the late afternoon, and unbolted the door and opened the shutters and lit the lamp and stood in the surgery and let it settle back around her. He came back in October. He came on a Tuesday, on the afternoon coach, with no letter of warning, and she heard the knock on the surgery door and opened it, and he was there in the yard light with the harbour behind him and the flat grey water and the sound of the rope walk in the distance. He said, "I told you I would come back." She said, "I believed you." She stepped back from the door. She said, "Come in, the kettle is on." He came in. He sat in her father's chair, which was the good chair, and she sat on the stool at the window, and they drank tea while the afternoon darkened, and he told her about the legal proceedings and the estate and the solicitor's relief, and she told him about the Marsh girl's second child, which had come early and fast on a Wednesday night, and about the new tooth puller who had set up shop at the end of the wharf and was charging too much and pulling the wrong teeth. After a while, the surgery was quiet. The lamp was low. The harbour had gone dark. He said, "I told you I knew what my life weighed." I want to say it better than that now. He looked at his hands. He said, "I had a brother. I lost him to something I could not stop, and I carried it north, and I carried it back south, and it has been in every room I have slept in for 9 months. You were the first person who asked me his name and waited for the answer." He stopped. He said, "I do not know the word for that yet. I am learning it. But I know I am learning it here, and I know I am learning it with you, and I would like to keep doing that if you will have me." She looked at him across the low lamp. She thought about Tam, whose name was on the headstone at St. Clement's near the yard, with the date and the good plain words she had chosen. She thought about the years after him, which had been hers, fully and quietly. She thought about a man against a mooring post and a pulse of 42, and a forged note in a leather satchel. She said, "I am not a woman who needs to be told the word. I am a woman who watches the hands. I have been watching yours for 7 weeks, and I know what they do when you are frightened, and I know what they do when you are thinking clearly, and I know what they did when you held the letter from Pruitt and understood what it meant." She paused. She said, "Keep learning the word. I am not going anywhere. The surgery is here, and the wharf is here, and I am here, and that is not a condition, it is a fact. You can build on a fact." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached across the space between the chair and the stool and set his hand on the edge of the table between them, open, palm up, the way a man sets something down carefully. She put her hand into it. He said, "From here," she said, "from here." Outside, the harbour moved in the dark. The rope walk had gone quiet. Along the wharf, the lanterns had come on, one by one at the fish sheds and the net houses, and the surgery on Cutter's Wharf, which was lit warm against the October night. Somewhere behind the net sheds, a boat knocked softly against its piling, and the water carried the sound along the dock in the way it always had and would. 9 months later, Dr. Arthur Sawn came back from a conference in Edinburgh and found his surgery in perfect order and his instrument cabinet correctly stocked and his daughter married to a Viscount who had been brought in off a mooring post, and who was, Blythe explained to him over tea, very useful in a crisis. Her father said, over the rim of his cup, "You dragged him in off the dock," she said. "I did," he said, "and then you diagnosed his poisoning, arranged 3 witnesses, rode to Darlington, identified a forged financial instrument, and gave evidence before a magistrate." She said, "I did." He set his cup down. He said, "Good. The tooth puller at the end of the wharf is still charging too much," she said. "I know. I've been dealing with it." Her father nodded. He picked up his cup again. He looked at the window, at the harbour in the spring morning, the same water, the same flat grey light, the fish carts and the rope walk girls, and the sounds that had been the sounds of her life since she could remember. He said, "The surgery is still yours, you know," she said. "I know." She had the press on the table in front of her, her father's old account ledger open to a fresh page, and the lamp on and her hand steady. She said, "It always was."